In one move after another, the United States is making huge efforts to counter China, especially in the economic sector, pushing the world's two largest economies further apart. However, the damage isn't limited to just these two countries. The rest of the world is also affected. And of course, on top of that, COVID-19 has made 2020 much more complicated and difficult. So, are we seeing the end of globalization as we know it? Will there be a full decoupling of the Chinese and U.S. economies? Is that even possible? With these questions in mind, today I'm very glad to speak to Professor Jin Keyu from the London School of Economics. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. So, Keyu, welcome to our program. In the recent article that you wrote, you made a very interesting point, saying that a multi-platform, you said, those advocating the two countries, U.S. and China, decoupling, do not intend to leave the Chinese market. Rather, they fear joining fair competition here in China. Elaborate on that, please.
First of all, people have made enormous amounts of profits by working with the Chinese, with Chinese businesses, selling to Chinese consumers, so everybody has benefited. I think that it's very clear that globalization with China's entry has pushed everyone to work together and engage in trade and services, and also students across the board. Now, the coming question is, not all countries have managed their domestic situations very well. And when that happens, they tend to blame somebody else. So over the last 20 years, what has been a surprising transformation is that Chinese companies have gotten incredibly competitive. And this is not coming from all kinds of subsidies or various kinds of illicit methods that some may accuse China of doing. It's just sheer competition. Even household appliances, for instance, in China is exporting to the world in huge amounts, and China's flooding the world with very high quality but cheaper products. So given this backdrop, and of course there's a turn to protectionism, a lot of people want to use as an excuse to not engage on fair play grounds with the Chinese companies because they can't beat them anymore. So they're using this as a pretext.
But what about their accusations that they're not enjoying the same access to market, technology, and financing here in China because of the government subsidies or favorable policies towards domestic companies?
Well, first of all kinds of countries, all governments practice some form of industrial policies or another. Many developing countries have utilized infant industry protection to harness certain important sectors so that they can grow and they can be competitive over time. We've seen this in virtually every single developing country.
But their arguments are that they are not infant industries anymore. You are very strong already.
So I was about to say is that was the old model. That was what China was doing when it first joined WTO, and we're still bickering about these old issues. These are old issues, but the new issues is really about liberalization and opening up, including the sectors that you mentioned, which is services, financial, and all kinds of internet services and whatever that is. So China has made a commitment to be more open than ever, and we're seeing real strides, practical moves, concrete steps in moving towards that direction. So I think that the world should stop talking about the old issues and let's focus on the real issues of the moment.
But do you think their concerns about those new areas are legitimate?
First of all, you just have to look at the evidence, and you see the negative list shrinking over time. The barriers to entry of certain sectors has gone down. Some have been removed entirely. Foreigners can open, foreign wholly owned companies in many different sectors. That negative list is shrinking. And China has a commitment to open the financial services in particular because it's not just for the foreigners, it's also for China itself. Chinese financial system, as we all know, has a myriad of problems, one of it which is to suffer from lack of competition. So by inviting foreign financial institutions in, you're bringing in new blood, fresh oxygen, oxygen, you're forcing these domestic institutions to compete, and you're exactly right, China is no longer in a situation where these institutions are highly immature and cannot resist the or cannot, meet the competition and challenges of the other. That has squarely changed, and the Chinese financial system is ready to improve.
So we have to follow the money, because the reason economists issued an article saying that the money managing companies actually coming to China in large quantities and with better ambitions than before, even in COVID time. Does that say a lot about what the money managers have been saying and thinking?
Well, first of all, where is the growth left around the world? Right? The Western advanced economies have low interest rate, almost zero low interest rate, almost zero yield, a very low yields, very low rates of return. And there's a lot of money, there's a lot of liquidity around the world chasing to find some returns. Where are you going to invest? Are you going to invest in the high return but highly volatile emerging markets outside of China? Or are you going to look at China seriously and say, this is a huge market, it's growing, it's proven to be extremely stable, it's the most rapidly recovered since COVID, and it has stable institutions, even if they are very different from the Western style ones. This shows that their ambition is to say that China has the potential, they believe in China's future, they know that it's going to be a very fierce competition when it comes to competing with domestic institutions, but they're ready to make the move because they're searching for growth.
But different sectors have different stories. It seems that the U.S. Want to decouple from China in the tech field. For example, the Trump administration's attacks on Huawei and TikTok, and banning technologies from entering the Chinese market. Will that mean the divergence of two tech ecosystems in the future?
Well, this is one stark example of where I feel that some of this is coming from not wanting to play on the same level playing field with Chinese companies, in particular with national champions like Huawei, who have proven that because of its technical capacities that has demonstrated around the world, that American companies don't want to compete fairly. And I think this is a good illustration of this. This is not just about national security issues or whatever issues that American, the presidential administration has put forth, but really also about competition, global competition of technological companies. Now, when you talk about decoupling, nothing is impossible, of course. Globalization is possible, and deglobalization is equally possible. But this is a huge cost to everybody, not just the U.S. and China, but even more so to the rest of the world, where you have two standards. Can you imagine using your Chinese phone, but some apps don't work when you go to, when you're on the travel, or the apps from Apple don't work if you're on a Huawei cell phone? This is not good for anybody, and it incurs a huge cost. So we're hoping that we don't go there.
Yeah, it is costly.
Yeah.
But do you think it will happen? Because a lot of signals are pointing that way. It will be very inconvenient and costly for the whole world to bear the brunt.
I don't think it's likely to happen. I think there's a lot of rhetoric, and especially around election time. It depends a lot on who's going to be the president next time around. These are long-term concerns. I don't think real decoupling is feasible because the two countries, in various ways, are deeply entrenched in production and supply chain, including a technological one, including all of the components. And if you look at the data, the three central countries in that supply chain network is China, U.S. and Germany, and they're very much fused with each other.
Because this is initiated by Americans, so you're arguing that they're trying to squeeze a better deal by bluffing, not really want to decouple with the Chinese.
Decoupling is thrown around, and I think it's highly irresponsible, to be very honest. If we look at the micro-level interactions between the U.S. and China, we're talking about the private sector. Right? We're talking about collaboration between universities. We're talking about collaboration, even during COVID, between hospitals and universities. There's a lot of private sector interaction and collaboration, despite what the government is saying. And there have been a lot of collegial kind of projects to push technology forward, to help solutions with COVID. So it's not the government that decides on these things, especially when it comes from America. If the American kind of administration think that they can either threaten or flatter the American companies outside of China, this is so ironic. This is a liberal democracy, and
it is kind of a mind-boggling why those stakeholders, as you said, those businesses involved in this, push back more strongly against the political interference from the U.S.
Why they don't?
Why don't they push back more strongly?
I think they do. I think that there are many business roundtables with very senior government officials at the White House asking them to do 1, 2, 3, and they're just simply saying no. And let's look at the numbers. I'm sitting on the board of a European big conglomerate, and half of the sales is coming from China. For certain brands, and this is just the reality. It's the numbers. Do they want to survive? Do they want to miss half the market? So.
All right, and we've also collected some opinions on social media on what is going on between China and the U.S. Obviously, there is a lot of buzz about what is going on between the #1 and #2 largest economies in the world. Foreign Astronomy said U.S. export controls are ironically a vote of U.S. confidence in China's economy and its ability to innovate, as it signals the U.S. expects China to escape the middle income trap. So this is a very widespread speculation that the U.S. is actually afraid of China taking over U.S. position as a technical dominator in the world. Do you think that's what the U.S. is worrying about?
I think U.S.'s worry is over 3 things. It's over Chinese aspirations, it's over the Chinese development model, and it's over the Chinese technology. It's not narrowly just on Chinese technology, although the U.S. Officials believe that the technological dominance is very important for even things like military competition and a whole wide range of advantages. But I really think this is about, it's a metaphysical, it's a kind of, it's a bigger and longer term problem of Chinese aspirations, not just in technology.
So we're witnessing a structural change happening.
I think it's been blown up by people who want to make loud voices about what's going on, and also by President Trump's administration. I think China has always been growing at a very steady pace, and even faster 10 years ago. Of course, now it's much bigger. I think that the differences in values and cultural preferences in Chinese unique system, which is political centralization with a lot of economic strength and state capacity, presents as an alternative to the liberal democracy which American exceptionalism has tried to broadcast to the whole world. And I think that there is another country with a different system that is a true challenge, not like Japan in the 1980s or even the Soviet Union. It's a trial of strength, to be more accurate.
But the Chinese system is also responding in its own way, because in the recent policy papers, China said we will rely on dual-track development, meaning a focus back on the internal market and circulation. Does that mean China will probably hedge the bets against decoupling from the U.S.?
It's very important to hedge any bets. And here we're not talking just about decoupling with the U.S. Let's think about the trading system, right? In the standard way of thinking about trade, everything is certain. There's no uncertainty. Everybody benefits. It's all about efficiency. But as we have seen from COVID and from even the global financial crisis, that there's a lot of uncertainty. So you cannot rely on everything working smoothly. So that's going to shift the trading system and global supply chain too. So you need to have anti-fragility measures even against that. Then of course with technology decoupling. But this brings to very interesting historical examples where Japan and Korea have pursued their own indigenous technology because they have seen that there's no way to get the high-tech and to absorb the high-tech or learn the high-tech technologies by simply relying on importing and trade. You have to do it yourself.
But I remember you always argue that external pressure will probably make China better, reform faster. Will that pressure go away?
There's a lot of external pressure going on right now and coming at all angles, and not just coming from the U.S. And I think that it still acts as a pressure point. It's not just to force domestic reforms, but it's also a reflection. It's a mirror reflection so that China can understand better where its strengths are, where its weaknesses are, how to reposition itself in a rapidly changing global situation and circumstance. And so all of that, nothing is separate from external events. But of course, the shift inward is a smart one, because China, unlike small countries,
and it's a necessary one.
It's a necessary one, and China enjoys the advantage of having a big market. It's only in the U.S. and China that have big enough markets so that you don't have to rely on external developments. So that's a smart move.
All right. We'll take a short break, and we'll come back to talk about how COVID has changed the world economic order. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Let's continue our talks with Professor Jin Keyu. Keyu, the best unknown this year is, of course, COVID-19. This pandemic has disrupted almost every country in the world, and the economic cycles has been turned upside down. But long-term effects, what will COVID-19 do to the world economic order?
I'm a believer of what we call the reversion to the mean, which is that these large shocks, even very large global shocks, can happen, and there will be indeed some permanent changes to ways of life and how business is conducted, etc., and also spurs of technology. But I believe that the economic order will not be permanently affected by this, what is, I believe, an alien kind of shock that has hit the global economy. It will have long-term consequences, such as unemployment not being able to recover, and lots of employment actually permanently deleted forever. It never comes back. But this is not unlike the kind of past crises we have seen. We have seen that because of technological development, many of this employment will just simply go away because firms use this opportunity to cut down a lot of employment.
The thing that I want to ask is that before COVID, we already saw signs of deglobalization. Right. And as you argued, globalization make the value chain working more efficiently, but also vulnerable to disruptions. And COVID is a good example. Will COVID accelerate deglobalization?
We tend to think that every time is different, but even with globalization and protectionism cycles, we've seen this over and over again. If you look at hundreds of years back, we've seen a few cycles of a huge enthusiasm for globalization and then a rapid return to protectionism. So this is nothing new. This is not the first cycle. And I do believe it is a cycle. I do believe that the world forward will still embrace globalization. But I think one of the permanent, not change, but considerations for governments to carefully reflect is anti-fragility. And this is the thing that I was talking about, is not overly being dependent in terms of, especially on critical supplies, on the global supply chain. So investing a lot in the resilience of a system.
What kind of structural adjustment will happen?
Well, first of all, a country needs to ensure that high-tech components, critical supplies, including medical equipment, these things you want to, just like food security, you want to be able to produce yourself. Locally. And there will be some shifts in terms of supply chain, so rather than just relying on one partner and supplier, finding multiple. And actually, it was accelerated already by the trade dispute between U.S. and China, and now exacerbated by COVID. But I think the large order of who trades what, whether trade will continue, and coordination and collaboration will still go on, although many politicians will use this as an excuse to push for protectionism. I
want to pin you down on this, because there is political implications for this. Because some people believe it is the failure of globalization, they want to turn to domestic politics. There's the populism, localism, isolationism on the rise. Do you think that will make every country's politics different?
I think it's exactly the other way around. I think it's the failure of many governments to deal with their domestic conditions
But they wouldn't
first.
accept that.
that they are blaming on globalization. If the reality is, and we can look at this through evidence, is that most of the inequality that has happened around the world and within the world, within countries, is due to technology. It's due to technological changes, not globalizations. But when politicians don't take care of their domestic citizens, they blame it on globalization.
But you know, the message to blame technology is not easily to sell.
Yes, it's not me versus you. It's much better when
to blame on somebody.
It's much better to
better
win elections.
And that seems to be working in many advanced economies.
Soon enough, everybody will suffer from the turn to protectionism, and economies will hurt. I mean, let me give you an example. China's imports have led to a 30% decline in the sneakers, the clothing, the furniture, the toys that American citizens buy, and has especially helped poor American households. Now, you imagine that there's a huge amount of inflation in those critical, essential items for American citizens. Are they not going to feel it soon and complain?
Let's talk a little bit about geopolitics. I know that you've been living in United Kingdom, and its relations with the European Union is tricky, and the EU is a vital player on the global stage. Now the U.S. is putting pressure on Europe, probably to pick sides. What will Europe do, and what kind of choices were likely to happen?
It's a hard choice because Europe is, first of all, Europe is very different from the U.S., and European countries, plus the United Kingdom, I should say now, are also very different and have different inclinations. Now, the U.K. has always been very open towards China and sees a huge amount of economic benefits by working with China, and it's also highly pragmatic, much less ideologically inclined than, say, the U.S. is. But COVID, the pandemic, has presented a difficult choice for everybody. Again, I want to repeat that when the domestic situation becomes very bad, then you tend to want to be, inward-looking and not embrace outside opportunities. But what choice does the UK have? It's chosen Brexit. It's not renewing the strong alliance with many others. The Commonwealth is not going to be dependable upon, and you want to be alienating China. I don't think that's a very smart choice.
But for the Europeans, it's always a very hard sell politically to bond with China full scale. They always worry about the ideological differences, the value differences. Do you think they will probably weigh over the options in a different way?
Even countries like Germany, especially these countries, have engaged a lot in trade with China, and they rely hugely on the Chinese market. Many countries are highly pragmatic, and the UK is certainly one of them. I think it's very different comparing France and Germany and UK in terms of their receptiveness to Chinese investment and Chinese businesses. But as I say, the COVID has changed the situation. I want to put that on hold, and once everybody gets back on their own track, they might be reconsidering how to strengthen bonds with China in the future.
American politics. In 9 weeks, we're going to have a new U.S. president, either a second term of Trump or a Biden administration. Will that change much to the U.S.-China relations?
I think it will not change the essence, but I think it changes a lot of the forms and the substance, because a Biden administration will likely be more rational, particularly on the economic fronts.
Even on China-U.S. economic relationship?
The U.S.-China relationship is a long-term issue. It's a bipartisan theme, and that is not going to go away. But I think that his advisors, when it comes to trade and in terms of collaborations on mega projects in the global, working with global institutions, that will be a serious change. But I think the most important thing is the U.S. administration currently, we can't deny that it is somewhat trying to demonize China around the world. And it's highly divisive. So it's stoked a lot of this deep hatred even and racial issues, not within the U.S. and between U.S. and China. I think that will go away, and that's very important.
So the substance won't change, but the different approaches. What will be Biden's approach against China?
Biden's approach will be healthy competition, I believe, working on certain things on the global scales, but still pressing China on a range of issues and potentially new issues, politically, socially, more than President Trump has.
Beijing will see the opening of China International Fair for Trade for Services 2020. This is a big thing for China because it's the first international event, probably after COVID, and it shows to the world that China is really paying attention to services. Do you think China will climb up the ladder of services in the coming years, and what does it mean for China's economy?
This is a huge opportunity because China has been very proactive and attained high productivity growth in manufacturing, trade, but here there's a huge gap in terms of productivity in services, and China will benefit by both exporting services, including tourism, which China, many countries depend on Chinese tourists, and I think most interesting is internet-related services.
No.
What this COVID episode has illustrated fully is that China is at the very, very frontier of the internet ecosystem, where you connect small business, medium-sized businesses with the retailers, with the consumers, with the medical workers, and because of big data, you can have precision targeting in terms of helping them individually, different groups, because I think that this COVID shock is very special. It hits different sectors and different individuals highly asymmetrically. We will not be so much affected as an auto mechanic, for instance. So you need precision targeting, but China is really the only country that has been able to pull that off because of the internet services it has provided.
Yeah. Many people say digital and services will be the future for China, and China has the benefit of converging those two trends together.
Yeah.
You think that will serve China
Absolutely.
very well?
Absolutely.
Let's also hear what are the buzz being saying about the service in China and what is the Chinese economic prospects in 2020. Reagan Lee said China now has around 400 million middle-income class, the largest in the world. China will import $10 trillion service in the next 15 years. What a huge opportunity for all countries and companies. This is exactly the point we've been talking about. China's 400 million middle-class citizens. That will be a big chance for the world.
The search for growth, coming back to this topic, is also one that is not only true for the rest of the world, but also for China. Where is the growth going to come from? It's going to come from services, but also employment is going to come from services. Manufacturing does not provide as much employment as services does, and there's a productivity catch-up. So I think if we're looking for growth, that's where we should be looking at.
And we understand that America has been strong in services. Europe probably also the case in different ways. How do they view those market of services here in China? And will they get away from that? And what are they thinking?
China's service as a share of GDP is substantially lower than the 80% share of GDP in advanced countries. So there is a gap to be filled. I think China is providing some of the new kinds of services, as we mentioned, in terms of digital, and that we don't see in Europe and the U.S. So it may well lead the way in those areas. And I actually believe that a lot of the physical services can be partially transplanted online. And again, this will showcase to the rest of the world how it can be done.
Thank you very much, Professor Ji.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Duan Beijing. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye for now.